Hello and welcome to another edition of The Nation. Heidi QUAH is a Malaysian social rights advocate. She is the founder and chief of Refuge for the Refugees, a non-profit organization that aims to raise awareness on the pressing conditions of refugees and provide them with the adequate support. She is the first Malaysian woman to receive the Queen's Young Leader Award. A lot of us read about it, but a lot of us are very happy for her, or rather, uh, are still very happy for her when she received that award some years ago. She's moved on. She joins me now to talk about refugees in Malaysia, still doing good work. And we're also going to get her thoughts on homelessness, begging, or the situation in KL and the rest of Malaysia, and more importantly, food security. Heidi, thank you so much for taking time off to be with us. We really appreciate you doing this for us. Just off the air, talking to you, you told me so many things that I want to talk to you about, but we'll get into that in a little bit. To begin this conversation, though, I'd like to talk about us crawling out of COVID, your observation on the refugee/ homeless situation in Malaysia. What do you see? What do you observe?
Yeah. First of all, Gerard, thank you so much for having me. It's an incredible honor to be here. I think crawling out of the pandemic, something that we have been noticing within the refugee, migrant, and the homelessness community is that while many of us things have sort of gone back to normal, for them, they're still really struggling to get back to jobs, to support their families. This is for various reasons. I think when the pandemic happened, a lot of them had to be let go of their jobs, and now being going out looking for jobs again is difficult. A lot of times, you're required to be double vaccinated and even boosted, and not all of them are boosted at this point of time. They've been trying their best to get vaccinated, but taking so many other things into consideration, how near are job opportunities. I mean, a lot of times they don't have cars or motorbikes,
Mhm.
or bikes, right? And so they depend on the public transport system. Yeah, so crawling out of pandemic has been tough. A lot of the work that we do with the community now really has been focusing on rehabilitation work and seeing how we can bring them one step forward.
Right. I'd like to read something to you from Bernama Wires. It was published a couple of days ago, and it reads, apparently in Ampang, most of the vagrants belong to the Rohingya community from Myanmar who seek public sympathy by getting their children to beg for money. In fact, some of the adults are known to rent their compatriots or children for this purpose. Now, in Brickfields, meanwhile, Indonesian vagrants with physical disabilities and with their leaders in tow under the guise of selling packets of tissue are a common sight. So, what are we looking at here? What do you see on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, on the ground, it's very rampant. We see, I mean, this isn't, if you go to Ampang, Brickfields, or even Pudu, you see a lot of this happening, right? People sitting by the streets with their babies, begging for money, with their children, begging for money. And I think this is mainly because there's no other way to find for a source of income for them. Refugees in Malaysia legally are not allowed to work, and even when you're allowed to work, a lot of times the moms are forced to stay at home with their kids because they simply can't afford childcare. So someone would have to stay home to care for the kids. I think coming out of the pandemic, we have seen many more without homes and living on the streets and begging simply because the pandemic had wiped out everything for them.
Mhm. Now, okay. Now that we've got some clarity on that, with these people who are going out there and begging for money or running a con job or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
um, what's being done is, from what I understand, is that people are going out there and feeding these people, and now we have a
Yes.
problem of overfeeding. And
Yes.
this was something that was told to me by Dato Munira from Prativi
Yeah.
Circuit. He says there's too much of feeding in KL. We are
Yeah.
wasting instead of using these resources to help people.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I definitely do agree. Especially, come whether is it Christmas or New Year's or one of the festivities where people want to do good, right?
Ramadan is
You'll
coming along
see,
soon. Yeah.
yeah, and you see that if you walk past these roads, you'll see them having 3 4 packets of rice that they probably can't finish. And I think that I think it's key and important that uh, people work with established organizations that already have programs running to serve the communities. I think we need to come together more as NGOs in Malaysia to see how we can work together and not waste resources.
Right.
And this is
Right. So
key
this is,
because
sorry, I just have to interject here
yeah,
because, okay, so here we're trying to find a space where we can work. So Bernama has gone out to do some work to show us a space where there's people using begging as a tool in order to make good money for themselves. There's
yeah,
also people who are generally really poor and they're living on the streets and they're begging. Having said that, from what I understand from Dato Munira, she's saying that we can help these people, we can get these people off the streets, but
yes,
it needs to be a sort of a working together situation where you have
yes,
NGOs, the government, and she
yes,
said the most important part of this tripod is the public. There needs to be
yes,
a sort of synergy between
yeah,
these three. What do you
yes.
see, and how can you
Yeah,
come up with ideas?
I definitely agree with that. Actually, I have been having a lot of conversations with, so okay, it started with the floods, right? We went to wholesale city malls, places that we used to go to, and we realized then at a point of time, so many stores were closed because they didn't have enough workers. Down the road, we work with wholesale suppliers, that sells vegetables and farmers, and they're telling me as well, Heidi, we don't have enough workers, we need extra hands. And I think that and so recently, when I was at an Economic Action Council meeting, I remember proposing and telling them that, like, obviously we see a big need of hands. We need people, need workers, businesses need workers, but there's so many people on the streets as well. I think if we come together collaboratively with NGOs, the government, and business owners, there's so many more job opportunities that we can offer to those living on the streets to get them off the streets. But obviously, we also understand that sometimes living on the streets is a. I used to think that it's because you don't have any other choice. But over the past couple of years of meeting different ones, sometimes they tell us that maybe they feel safer on the streets, right? So I do think that there are ways to match those on the streets that want jobs instead of begging to job opportunities out there. Factories are crying out, plantations are crying out, and the only way for us to stabilize our economy system is when we bring more people into the workforce.
Right. That's going to be an interesting part of this conversation when we talk about food security. I want to bring that up a little later, but I want to move into something you wanted to talk about. So, just to give the viewer a bit of context as to what's happening here, we've decided to carry something on homelessness, begging, the refugee situation in Malaysia. And in the last week, Bernama Wires went out and did a bit of a survey, a bit of a social experiment. And over the weekend, I got to speak to a couple of people from various soup kitchens. So I'm getting a lot of different messages as to what's happening out there. But the one thing that's consistent is we need people to work in this country, and we don't have people to work in this country. We're going to get to that.
Yeah,
But while I was speaking to you, you did mention something about dumpster diving. So I went,
yeah,
I won't say I researched it, I went Google dumpster diving, and there were many different definitions as to
yeah,
what this is. Now, when
yeah.
you talk about dumpster diving, you're talking about a case that happened recently. Two Burmese kids lost their lives while dumpster diving. Can you just walk us through a little bit of that story and why you want to talk about it today?
Yes. So when the news came up about the two Burmese kids in Langkawi who died from dumpster diving, I think quite a I mean, it really bothered quite a number of people. Uh, and this is a reality. I mean, when it was brought up to me, I remember that day I received about 10, 15 calls, people asking me, Heidi, what can we do? What are we doing for the communities? How do we make sure that something like this will never happen again? And it's simple. The simple solution is food security, making sure that communities don't end up being so poor to the point that they can't even buy food. And it's interlinked, right, with job opportunities and everything else as well. This doesn't just happen in Langkawi. It actually happens right here in our neighborhood, in Chowkit area, in Pudu. So often when I'm in Chowkit and Pudu, walking, in the lorongs, I would see kids actually kids or families going to the big green beans, and stuffing their hands inside, taking out, rice and noodles that kopitiams have thrown away, and washing it through a basket. And they wash it and they boil it and then they salt it and they eat it because they don't have any other source of food. And so I think, I mean, food security is a basic need that we should meet. And
Yeah, but here's the thing, when you talk about food security, most of us think, okay, food security, we're going through a pandemic now. Do we have enough beras in the country? Do we have enough vegetables coming through? How about fruit and just the essentials? So this is how I would think. But I'm sure there's a better explanation to this as to how we can break it down ourselves as individuals, as part of a collective, as part of a nation.
Yeah, so when I talk about food security, especially for vulnerable, marginalized communities, it's as simple as making sure that these kids have access to meals, just simple, basic meals. It doesn't need to be fancy. Actually, I'm pretty sure that a lot of Kebangsaan school kids um, that can't afford food during recess are actually given those meals. So when I think about food security, I think it's dual prong, right? It's first making sure the basics of making sure that kids at least have access to proper meals, also because their immune systems are a lot, it's easier to compromise the immune systems. But number two, when I look at food security, I look at those around us that don't have jobs and see if we can put them in plantations, in factories, because that's where the lack is. Farmers are telling me that so much of their crops have to go to waste, only because they don't have enough people working, and they can't seem to get workers to work for them legally. So I think that if we put a blanket covering, for example, if we don't want to legalize refugees working in Malaysia, if we want to just put a blanket covering for certain industries to hire refugees, I think that can eventually help us look
Okay,
into food
so
security
what
much
seems to
better.
be the problem here with hiring refugees to do these jobs? You want to call it 3D jobs? I just call it a job. A job is a job, whether you're
Yeah,
a radio DJ, a TV
yeah,
announcer, or
yeah,
working in a plantation. It
yeah,
is essentially a job.
yeah,
Now, you've recognized a space. I do understand that you also spoke to the Economic Action Council. Correct
yeah.
me if I'm wrong here. Now,
Yes.
you recognize the space. Do you think if you were given the chance to fix this, you could?
Yes, it was if I was given a chance to fix this and the support system to do so, I could, and I would. I think it's simple. It's legalizing refugees and migrants and undocumented community to work in certain areas. It's actually not very difficult. I mean, I'm sure we are aware as a nation that each and every time we need labor force, we bring in migrants in the hundreds, in the 200s, in the thousands, every time we need labor force. Obviously, that has changed a little because of the pandemic. But because we can't bring in these people anymore, and because COVID cases are still rising, my thoughts are, why can't we utilize the communities that are in our nation already? Yeah.
Sure. I need to fill in here. So if you say we use refugees who are here, they come. Some of them are in our towns with a UNHCR card. Okay, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, are they allowed to work with these cards? Can they be given jobs?
So I think it's a very gray area. Sometimes in certain years, they're told that yes, you can work with these cards in certain industries. And then suddenly the rule changes and they say, like, okay, no, you can't work with these cards. Sometimes, even with the ruling that they can work with these cards, there has been instances where places have been raided and they have been brought into detention centers as well. So I think because of the huge lack of clarity and the constant change of rules, the refugee and the migrant community are constantly living in fear. But it's not just them, right? It's the local business owners that would want to hire refugees and locals as well. They don't know if they'll get fined. I'm not sure, Gerard, if you remember, right smack at the start of the pandemic, NSK was slapped with a huge fine for hiring migrant workers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty vivid. Yes, still. Yeah. So do you have the backstory to this?
Not, I mean, at that point of time, immigration was just going all out, telling business owners that they can't hire refugees and migrants. That whole anti-party campaign was happening. Even locals that were renting their homes to refugees and migrants were being given a notice saying that they need to be evicted.
Okay, so you've seen all this. You've seen how it's played out in the past 3 years, and you've
Yeah,
just in the past couple of weeks you spoke to the Economic Action Council, and
yeah.
you gave out suggestions. Can you lay out for us, or is this still something that cannot be disclosed as to the suggestions you've put forward?
Yeah. I will share briefly the suggestions that I put forward. Number one, it was to look into giving blanket covering for certain sectors that does high production, whether is it plantations or factories, to allow refugees and migrants to work in the country. There has to be a way to allow them to work legally, for the benefit of the businesses, but also for their benefit, so that they don't end up, being on the streets or trying to beg for money. So that was one of the main points that we brought up, and we urged the Economic Action Council to take urgent look into.
Mhm. So it sounds like a very interesting and doable idea, but I'm sure you've also weighed the pros and the cons with regards to how this initiative can move forward, right?
Yes,
Right. So
yes.
can you just walk us through a little bit of the pros and cons to working out something like this? It looks, through the looking glass, it seems like a fantastic idea. We've got a gap, we've got the people, we need the work done. It can be done. All we need to do is just match the people and the work, and voila, we've got something doing. But I'm sure there are more with regards to pros and cons here.
Yes, most definitely. So I think the number one, I mean, let's start looking at, what's good from this, right?
Mhm.
What's good is that it's a win-win for everyone. We look into businesses being able to produce and to sell more. We look into the refugee and migrant community having job stability and being able to depend on their families and not so much depend on NGOs or individuals for handouts anymore. So I think that is very beneficial. When parents have money, they can also send their kids to school, and that is a plus.
Right.
So when we look at that, just from that perspective, it's a win-win. I think the struggle would be getting immigration actually to agree to it, um, to allowing refugees and migrants to work, and obviously then how do we I mean, I'm sure, Gerard, you know that there are Malaysians that are saying that refugees shouldn't be given the rights to work here in
Yeah,
Malaysia,
I
and
mean, I
if
know
jobs, yeah,
people within my close circle of friends
yeah,
and
yeah,
family.
yeah,
They go out to town and they see a street full of migrants and they say, "Oh, what's become of this country?" It's like,
yeah,
re- yeah. No, how do you
yeah,
even? How, I can't even wrap that concept around my head. I don't seem to understand it, but a lot of people do. So it only tells me this: a lot of people still find it hard to acclimate to the situation, the changing or the fluidity of the evolution of things and how people move or migrate around the world. So I guess
yeah,
we're still having problems with grasping
yeah.
this concept. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I do think it's very selective, though. I mean, we seem to catch on to the K-pop culture pretty quickly here in Malaysia, or just,
arts and all
or
that. Yeah,
yeah, the K-pop culture, or everything else that's brought in from the Western worlds, right? But when it comes to the refugee and migrants, you go like, oh no, we don't want anything to do with these people. We forget that they are people as well. Yeah, so I think we need to shift our perspective. I actually often tell people that one of the reasons why that houses in Malaysia are fairly affordable. Whether is it food producers are fairly affordable still. We can buy clothes for fairly affordable prices. It's because we have a large population of the migrant and refugee community here working jobs that a lot of locals don't want to explore.
right. So I guess we're running out of time. So time management is the essence of where we're going to go with this conversation now. First thing I want to ask you, before I talk about Refuge for the refugees and what kind of help you need, let's talk about, can we get people off the streets? So I think that by and large, that's the question. Now, there seems to be this need to clean up the city or parts of Malaysia or urban parts of Malaysia. Can that happen?
I The short answer is yes. I think that can happen. I think it can happen gradually. We can first start setting up more shelters to bring people in and to put people in shelters. So I think it starts from there, then slowly upskilling them and connecting them to jobs. Um, yeah.
Okay, so it can be done. We need to build enough shelters. The same thing Dr. Munira echoed to us yesterday when we spoke to her. We need shelters. When we also need shelters with psychological or psychiatric help for those who are
Yeah.
depressed. And yeah, so she was saying things like that going down the road. Now let's talk about the refuge for the refugees. You mentioned to me at some point when you started this whole initiative 10 years ago, you had to put together 60,000 ringgit a week to feed people. It was a tough time for you, but you've come a long way. Where are you at now, and how
Yeah.
can we help?
Yeah, so we are in a really exciting phase of rebuilding and rehabilitation. The past 2 years, with COVID and lockdowns, we have been on the front lines of setting up 8 to 1,000 families every single week. Right after that, floods happened, so the team rallied people and went into flood locations, rebuilding homes, bringing in supplies. Now that the crisis relief and the intensity of that has kind of died down a little bit, thankfully. We are looking into rehabilitation, rebuilding schools, getting kids back into school, doing awareness campaigns and legal, especially legal clinics for the refugee and migrant community to teach them to understand their rights when they've been arrested or detained. We are going into new areas to continue setting up schools there and sundry shops. So I mean, this is just some of the things that we do. We always love to have extra volunteers on board. If you have legal knowledge, that would be fantastic as well.
So you're looking for people with legal knowledge to come on as volunteers. That would be a bonus if someone has legal knowledge. You want
Yeah,
people to
legal
know.
knowledge, or if they are healthcare doctors, that would be fantastic.
Right. So if you're a healthcare practitioner,
Yeah,
doesn't matter what kind of healthcare
yeah,
practitioner, and you have
yeah,
legal knowledge,
yeah.
this will be a bonus. But you're always looking for volunteers. If I have to go to a website, which website would I go to
Um,
volunteer?
I think okay, so we don't exactly have a website up yet, but we
10
are
years.
quite.
Yes, website.
I know. It's like we started off as kids and we just never really had the time to kind of build a website, right? But if you go to our Instagram page, Refuge for the Refugees, there will be a link to with plenty of links that you can click on to read more about the work that we do, to find out more about us, to arrange for a conversation with us. But yes, we do need to get on a website.
Right. Just one more question. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is going to be thorny. I've been asking a lot of people about this, and it's about syndicates.
Yeah.
Do you think there are syndicates on the ground running
Yes.
things? Uh,
Yes.
you believe so?
Yes, I have personally. So because the work dabbles with the refugee and migrant community, I've had my run-ins with syndicates actually. Gerard, do you know that Malaysia was or still is the top 5 countries involved in baby selling worldwide, where babies are taken away from their mothers against their will to be sold for a lot of money. A lot of times, the victims, the people who fall victim to baby selling are migrant and refugee ladies because they can't afford to go to hospitals with the fear of being detained, and because of the price point, so they end up going to really shady clinics to give birth, only to find out and only to realize that their babies will be taken away from them against their will to be sold for a lot of money. The selling price varies. The last case I took on in 2018, the baby, who was a Filipino Pakistani, was being sold for 120,000 ringgit Malaysia, which is a lot of money. Um, and because of my involvement in them, the syndicate came after me, uh, and messed around for a bit. So yeah, there are syndicates around. I mean, on the streets, but also just there are syndicates that are that earn good money by bringing migrants and refugees into the country.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
there are, yeah. So I do
But
think
we,
that
we, we get
syndicates
the picture. I
exist.
hear you.
Yeah,
I see where you're coming
yeah.
from, and our heart goes out to all the great work you do. One last question. If I see kids running on the streets begging for money, knocking, rapping on windows or windows of cars and asking for money, and they look like migrant children, what do I do? 1 minute.
Um, that's a big question. You can either find ways to, I mean, if you feel called to, you can support them. But what I usually do would be to ask them to bring me back to their family, and then I'll buy a meal for them if they need a meal.
Right, right.
Yeah. So I usually go like, where's your mom or where are your
Mhm,
parents?
mhm.
And then I would go to meet the parents instead.
Thank you very much, Heidi QUAH. You've been doing
No
great years
problem.
for great work for 10 years. I hope you'll see us through another 10 with
Yeah.
the fantastic work you're doing. Thank you very
Thank you
much
so much,
from the
Gerard.
bottom of
Thank you.
all our hearts here at Bernama.
Thank you, Gerard.
We just spoke to Heidi QUAH, a Malaysian social rights advocate. She is the founder and chief of Refuge for the Refugees, a non-profit organization that aims to raise awareness on the pressing conditions of refugees and provide them with support right here on the nation. Thank you very much for staying with us. I'm Gerard Ratnam, signing out.